Okay.
So is that the same?
So we talked about unit testing the other day, and this time now you saw it inside of Rails. Who got stuck trying to do this homework? Let's talk about stuckedness. I'm sure some people are stuck. Yes.
I mean, I ended up doing it in the end, but it's confusing because you start creating a table, and you're like, oh wait, does this go here, or is there a merge for these? Like, you know those weird tables that are a table of like an aggregate of two other tables?
You mean many to many?
Yeah, sorry, that's what I meant to say.
Yeah.
So it's actually much trickier than you'd anticipate.
Uh-huh.
It takes some thinking. Like you do it, and then you'll wait a minute. Like, so it was a lot more challenging than I anticipated.
Uh-huh.
Like, but it also makes you think it through.
Yeah.
Very heavily.
Yeah. I forget. Does the example tell you to do has many on two ends, or does it have a has and belongs to many?
It doesn't really.
It didn't really say, yeah.
Does it say?
I ended up doing has many for two different tables.
Gotcha.
Many.
That's the right way to do it. There's an old construct in Rails called has and belongs to many, which is still there, but it's not recommended because it sort of implicitly creates that middle table, and it really is important for you to know that middle table is there. Did you guys get the tests to work? Yep. What did it use? RSpec or Minitest? I forget.
I think Minitest.
Minitest?
Is that in the book?
Yeah. Is anybody confused by this proliferation of? I'm going to take this really ugly old sweater off because it's warm. I've been told that this sweater is very old-fashioned and from the 80s. So this is going to go in the furnace when I get home.
No.
Retro is in.
Yeah.
Retro
No. Off with his head. Wait a minute. Is this shirt okay?
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, I don't have any problem. I like nostalgia, so.
I like old people. Old people are okay. Yeah. Okay. Does anybody get confused by this business of this RSpec, this Minitest spec, or do you kind of have your head around what's going on there?
So I was trying to read up on the three different ones, and I'm finding it hard to figure out like what the essential like main difference between them is.
They're
it seems
small.
Like they're very interchangeable.
They're very interchangeable.
Yeah.
The details are in small syntax differences.
So would it matter like for bargaining, for example, when we're running tests? Like, could we choose from any of the three, or is there one that's like the best fit?
No. You'll find big religious battles over that. RSpec is, I think, a little bit more popular, but for me, the problem it has is it's extremely tricky. It does a lot of very complicated meta-programming that you don't see. It happens behind the scenes, but then when you have errors, they're kind of hard to figure out. Minitest is very, very straight up. It's like, doesn't do anything too confusing. You can understand what it's doing. And Minitest spec is kind of in between. So that's why I recommend Minitest spec. Also, you don't have to install a special gem for that.
Yep.
And the fewer gems you have, especially complicated ones, the better. But basically, the central concept is just like JUnit. I mean, it's just a bunch of tests formed into a test suite, and then a bunch of assertions. That's the essential. The details are just in the syntax. Okay. Who can talk about what they think test fixtures are? Test fixtures. You read about it. You probably know it. But your mouth is probably full. You need something. Copy. Anybody? What's a test fixture? Careful rubbing your eye because I'll take that as a hand up. Nobody? Come on. Oh, thank you.
Well, as far as some of the reading, in the reading it says that it's the environment in which you do your testing in.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's.
Yeah, that's yeah.
It creates like fake tests that you can run, or fake products, whatever you can run your
Yeah.
tests on.
Yeah, it's just the test data. That's all it is. You know, it's like I have to test it when I add an employee to the or when I add a shape to the scene. Now there's more shapes in the scene. Well, I have to create a scene out of thin air just to do testing on. And maybe I want to test it against 5 different scenes. One that's empty, one that's full, one that's really full, one that's full of rectangle, one that's full of triangles. And so I'll create those 5 test fixtures in one shot, and I can use them on all the tests. That's all it is.
So when we did the homework for doing the TDD,
Yeah.
When we used the before loop where it generated like a dummy thing, is that sort of the same as like a test fixture?
It's not the same, but it's where you are one of the very common places to create a test fixture. But in the before is basically if you find yourself writing 10 tests that all have the same first line, you go, oh, there should be a before. So it could be reset the database, it could be open the database, and it could be very common to create fixtures. Okay? All right, so what I'm going to do today is basically go down a level deeper, and it's going to be repetitive, but it's going to help you understand it. So here's another picture of the way a Rails server works, or really many, many different kinds of servers. So remember again that what we're talking about is two computers, one is a client, one is a server, and the server has a database and does other things, and the client makes a request, sends an HTTP request over to do a GET on a URL, and the server's job is to get data out of the database, assemble it into a nice bit of HTML, and send it back. Right? That's basics. And they talk to each other with this protocol called HTTP. So let's take apart all the little bits, and then I'm going to show you in code how these bits work. Oh, I'm recording, right? I'm pretty sure I am. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the model, there's two bits. The model conceptually represents the data, the persistent data, no matter where it is. Okay. Now, all the examples you'll be doing for a while, the model always would be the stand-in for a record in a database. But there's other things that could be a model. A model could be a stand-in for a file. It could even be a stand-in for a resource on another computer. But basically, it's sort of the stand-in for, within your world of writing Rails code, the stand-in for the data. Why do you think, like if I have students, the database is called students, but the model is called student? Anybody have a theory why that is? Yeah.
Because the model isn't of all of the students. The model is of a specific student and what fields that student will have. The table is a bunch of students.
Exactly. Now it is a little confusing because if you look at the class methods on a model, like student.all, that's a little confusing because in that mode the class itself seems to stand a little bit for all of them. But really that's the reason. So when I give you an object of class student, you know that it represents one student. And if I want to represent a bunch of students, I have to give you an array or another kind of collection of a bunch of records, a bunch of objects of type student. Yeah?
So random question, in the example we were just talking, if you were to say student.all,
Yeah.
is that going to refer to every student in your student database?
Yes.
As opposed to, so it's going to, okay.
So no. It's believe me, it's a very good question and an easy thing to get sort of mixed up about. Because the important thing is that these models, they're active record models, and the big job in the life of active record is to connect to the database. And so every little thing you do to, every little sort of like very apparently trivial, mundane method you send to a model, an instance of a model or the model itself, actually can turn loose an amazing avalanche of code in the back end in the active record to fully create this illusion. Okay? And so when you say model.all, it will actually realize that it corresponds to, student.all, it'll realize that number one, we're talking about a record in a database called students, and it's going to go to that database and send it a command that says, send me all the students you have, and it's going to receive that over whatever means the database sends it, and it's going to parse it up, and it's going to instantiate that many that many objects of class student, and it's going to populate the data in them, and then it's going to give that to you. So it's going to do all that to try to create the illusion that, in fact, the students are all right there, and I'm just, they're all sitting in memory, but they're not. I think I talked to you guys about metaphors and leaky metaphors. Metaphor or abstractions and leaky abstractions. It's trying to make an abstraction of this relational database, trying to make you believe in every way it can that this model class actually is a collection of students, but it's not really. And it's a leaky abstraction because you quickly have to, once you go just a few more steps into it, like before this course is over, you will become pretty aware of where the illusion breaks down. And you'll have to be aware of that. For example, if I say model.find, model.where name : Salas, and it returns me an object, and I say, let's say s equals student.where name : Salas. @s is now a single object of class student, and I now say at s dot birthday is October 12th, 2001, the database hasn't changed. In fact, if my computer crashes then, nothing has changed. I have to do at s dot save before it changes. Very common thing to be confused about, because you get so embroiled in the metaphor, in the abstraction, you believe that when you do at s dot birthday is such and such, you've changed the record, but you haven't. So that's why I call it's a leaky abstraction. You have to be aware of it, okay? Oh, not now. Now, one of the perennial design questions is what logic you put in the model and what logic you put somewhere else. So one of the classic ones that you've already experimented with is validations. You can say, as an absolute statement, that a salary must be greater than 0. And so if the model specifies that validation, then if you attempt to do at s, that's the student, dot salary equals minus 100, nothing happens. But if you say at s dot save, it's going to say, sorry, I will not let that into the database because it's invalid. So validations are kind of like the last firewall against bad data being put into the database. But there's other things. For example, the classic example is if you have a first name column and a last name column in your database, so you would have student.firstname and student.lastname. You may want to have a student.fullname method, which simply grabs those two things and concatenates them together with a space between them. That would be a classic other method to put in a model. But quickly it becomes not as clear. If I want to say enroll a student, do I say student.enroll in @C, which is another course? Or do I say @C, which is a course.enroll student? Or do I do something totally different? Immediately, once you get into anything a little bit less trivial, you are confronted with the question, where do I put this functionality? And that's part of the design facility that you're going to develop. Did you understand that example? Let me just draw it out a little bit. So basically, if I have, I'm going to write some code here. Great. Okay. So I'm going to say, selected the two pens that work. This was not one of them. Over here. I say at student equals student dot where. This is real code. Name salad. And I say at C equals course dot where. Title, whatever they're called, I don't know what they're called. Title, Cosi 105. And now I want to have the code to register this student in this course. I have at least 3 choices. The first choice is to have a method on student that takes a parameter of a course and registers it. The second choice is to have a method in course that takes a parameter student and registers it. What's the third choice? Okay, go ahead, say more.
We can do like a joint table of students and courses, what we call an enrollment, just
Yep.
like last week's
Yep.
example, where we put 2 foreign keys. One of them is the student name, and the
Yep.
other is the course name.
Yep, and then where would you put the logic that actually causes the enrollment? Because before I allow you to enroll, I have to check that you're in the right, you have the requirements, a lot of other things that have to happen. Where would I put that method that checks that, what they in the lingo might call the business logic? Anybody? If I don't want to put the business logic in students, and I don't want to put the business logic in course, where can I put it? I mean, you're not actually too far off there. Maybe, maybe not. Because I may have another class altogether called enrollment manager. You know? And maybe that has a method that says enroll this student in this course, and it is the one that applies the business logic. So you have very clear choices in designing this. In fact, in general, I mean, if you've done any programming in object-oriented style, you have come up against the question, where should I put this message? If class A and class B are collaborating, and I have to do functionality which connects the two, where do I put it? Do I put it in A and do I put it in B? And people will have debates about this. And you know, ways to think about it are single responsibility principle. Is this really the job of the student to know the rules that say when they're allowed to enroll the course? Probably not. Is it the course's job? Maybe not. Maybe it's the registrar's job. Maybe it's a method on the class called registrar. I'm not saying what's right or wrong, I'm just saying this is a design question that could be tricky. But so the model class, at its very core, sometimes has nothing in it because Active Record automatically comes up with the methods by looking at the database. Sometimes has just validations. Sometimes has a few more methods. But there's kind of the strict guideline. It's kind of a contradiction. The guideline is, if the functionality is not strictly related to the way this data gets persisted to the database, it probably does not belong in the model. Okay? Now, I'm now going to tell you a little story about how a Rails server works. I've drawn this picture a lot of times, but I just don't remember how I draw it. So I have a browser, and somebody types in http://brandeis.edu/enroll/ or list enroll, say list. Okay? Now, I've told you this before, I'm going to tell you again, but now with more reference to the code. So what happens? So this URL, obviously we know now, gets sent to the server. So all this is going to be the server. Okay? The first guy that gets a hold of this URL is called the router, or the routes. And the routes subsystem, and you saw this in your example, is basically a set of pattern matching rules which analyze this URL and comes up with a target where that URL will be handled. That target will be in a what? What is the code that handles the first line of defense on a URL coming in, a get HTTP request with the URL? You guys, what's the code called that handles that? It's in the say what? Controller. Yeah, the controller. Yeah, exactly. There's the picture. Comes into the controller. So the controller is selected. I'm going to oversimplify for explanatory purposes. I'm going to say user 1. Or better still, user/show/1. Okay? So it's going to first use its rule, and in this very, very default scenario, this part is going to be used to determine what the controller is that gets into play. So it's going to look for the user controller, which is literally a .rb file. Okay, and in the user controller, it's going to also say, by the way, so that's the first thing, number 1. No, it's not right. And then we'll say plus show action. Okay, so if you look at this code for the user controller, you're going to find class, users, and in here you're going to see a method called def show. And that code gets called. Okay? So the routes get parsed, it gets changed, it gets analyzed, and the rules are involved, so I'm just going to keep it very simple now. It's going to tell it what controller to find. It's going to find the controller called user's controller, which is obviously totally distinct from the model. In there, it's going to expect to find a show action. If it doesn't find a show action, it throws an error. And if it finds a show action, it executes this code. Okay? Now, let's imagine that this command basically says, show me the profile for user number 1. So the first thing in here is going to invoke the model. It's going to ask the model. We're going to call this the model here. It's going to say, who's user number 1? The way it's going to say that, it's going to say user.find 1. Oh, not 1, wrong. User.find params bracket colon ID at u equals. Okay, this is interesting. This part here is very important because this params bracket ID is going to resolve, is going to contain, because this is a hash, that's a hash key, it's going to contain 1, because I said 1 here. If I said 100 here, it would say 100, this would be equal to 100. How did that work? Well, because in addition to the user controller.rb that the router sets up, and in addition to the show action that the router also sets up, it sets up a params hash with a bunch of stuff in it. Most importantly, this ID. So when the controller runs, it's going to say user find params bracket ID. ID corresponds to this. It's going to be at u. That's going to be instance variable of this controller. Okay? And now, oddly enough, it'll say n. But really, we know that what it's going to do next is it's going to call a certain view. There's a bunch of views in here. The view it's going to call is going to be called show. In fact, it's going to be a show view for the collection of views related to users. So in fact, if you look at the directory of users, of views, you would see app / views / users / and you'll see a bunch of files here called something.erb, and it's going to locate this one. It's going to process it. What kind of processing does an ERB file have? What kind of processing? I'm not going to talk again until somebody answers the question correctly, because I want to make sure everybody's on. So what kind of processing is an ERB file subjected to? Somebody from this table. I'm kind of feeling this table knows. You can say every other word. You can say one word each other. Now, you can say pass if you're really stuck. Oh, that's a problem if you know the question. What kind of processing does the Rails server do with an ERB file? What kind of, it does HTML processing? Pardon?
HTML.
I have to hear you, so covering your mouth with
HTML.
No, that's not a kind of processing. What kind of processing does it do? You? Nothing? Nothing?
You can guess.
That's all I want. I want
Is it a template?
Make a sentence. The kind of processing it does is
Processing the web page.
yeah. Anybody else? But you're on the right track, but nobody's clicking here. So yes.
HTML rendering?
No. What it does is, because what does an ERB file look like? Everybody remember what they look like? They look something like this. They look like HTML. I don't remember exactly what it looks like, to be honest. It's going to say H1, and it's going to say percent equals @user @u.name percent profile. So this is an H1 header, H1 tag in HTML, and it's going to want to give the head, the title, the H1 tag, pedo's profile. So and this is an ERB file. And the way I know it's an ERB file is it's got these funky little angle bracket things. So the kind of processing that an ERB file undergoes is such that all the angle bracket percent instances in that file get executed as Ruby code, return text, and get substituted in place so that after processing, the result is a regular old HTML file. Okay, so you remember the drawing that I had? I have the data, I have the templates, they get combined together into HTML. And this combination happens with ERB. Okay? Yes?
How is that different from what I said, that it processes the HTML and makes it from this like template?
I don't think you said that whole sentence. Then
Okay.
you one.
Okay.
Maybe you were thinking it.
Maybe.
Yeah. 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 it's okay, because sometimes you may have an idea intuitively in pictures or whatever, in feelings, but not really know the sentence. That's cool. But I wanted to make sure you guys all think about it. So this ERB file gets processed automatically by the Rails server and produces an HTML file. This is happening automatically. And that HTML file is then returned back as the response to this. Okay? It's an ugly picture. Here's a prettier version of it. Sorry. Okay, so we have the request coming in from the browser. The router analyzes the request, figures out that, because it says /users, that it's the user's controller. Figures out also, because of the way the pattern matches are written, that we're looking for the index action. In this index action of the user's controller, it knows that we want to see all the users, so it does a users.all command to the model. The models know to talk to the database. The records come back. The app users is an array of individual user objects. The view looks for index.html.erb, processes the ERB, takes out the angle brackets, returns pure HTML, which the controller then returns. This is like the what's the fundamental the fundamental law of, let's say, biology, or of genetics, or of mathematics.
Mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell.
Okay, let's say that. But I had something else in mind. But yeah, it has to do with DNA and RNA and all this stuff. This is the central theorem of the Rails system. You got to understand this, and you will understand it, even though right now, and I'm going to show it to you again in step by step in a second. Yes, was that a hand? No.
Well, so the model just handles requests for any database related.
Yeah, that's
So
the only thing.
would ask, what's the user
Yeah.
name from this ID?
Exactly. So the controller knows, because of data that it got from the router as a result of parsing the URL, all the details about the data it needs. It asks the model for that data.
We have one model in total, or?
No, you have one model for each table in your database.
Oh, okay.
You have a user model, a course model, a registration model, whatever. There's one model for every database.
Sorry, this is gonna be a stupid question.
I want stupid questions,
So-
because there's 10 others that are not being said.
Okay, so.
And, well, I should have said there are no stupid questions.
So you know how like it creates some of the tables on the fly, right? When we're does it?
No, it doesn't.
So for example, if we needed a table that's like the courses and students exam,
Yeah.
that itself will have a model.
It will have a model. So you
How
don't
do
have
you
to
have a fundamental law of biology in your course?
Okay.
But you have to have a model. Remember yesterday we said sometimes the models end up having other useful information.
Yeah.
So it's meant to be a model. Did you get it? What is it? Is that the central theorem?
I'm just making fun of her because
I studied biology,
So-
so I really couldn't get. I was like, "What are you trying to get?"
So is it? Am I know
Yeah,
vaguely.
the controller, I guess, could be the nucleus. And then
No. What I meant was
Cell
the
biology.
central hypothesis of genetics, something like that. The central dogma. That's what I was looking at. The central dogma. Okay.
DNA, RNA.
Yeah, that's the central. So this is the central dogma of Rails. Okay.
Is molecular biology?
Huh?
Well, like, you know,
How do you
I
get
took
it?
computational molecular biology last semester.
Okay, but it's over. When the courses are over, reset, erase the memory. Yeah. Okay, so that's the central dogma. Okay. I gotta put that in my notes. All right. All right. So far, so good. Now we're going to do this again, but I'm going to actually code. It's always much more fun. Any questions, by the way, that are still lingering before I dive into coding? If you're daring, you can try to code along with me. You're welcome to do so, or you can just watch. Okay.
Let's do this rendering. Where should we do this drop-down?
Okay. So I'm going to go to my dev directory as always. So this example is an example where we're going to have 3 tables. A person table, which has a name, date of birth, gender, and zip code. An event like a party or one of your Carpe Diem product. event name and date, and registrations. Person ID is registering to event ID. Status is it confirmed or whatever, or canceled, and comment. So it's 3 tables, many relationship between events and registrations. Okay? So, yeah, I changed this. Maybe I have to refresh this. Ah, very good. Thank you. I just half an hour ago went through this at my desk to make sure it still worked. Okay, here we go. So we're going to do Rails. No, that's not it. Here. Is this font big enough?
Yep.
Yeah, guy sitting in the front row says yes. How about back row guys? Is it okay?
You can make it a little bit bigger.
Huh?
You can make it a little bit
Okay.
bigger.
This guy, he's much closer. He needs it bigger. How's that? Okay, so this as usual this is Rails doing its thing. Convention over configuration. It has a lot of assumptions about the way you should organize your code. That's just the way Rails is. Most people, people that use Rails like that. Put it that way. Then it's going through and automatically loading all the gems that are required by this application. The Rails knows what they are, and it's doing that automatically. And then finally, it runs bundler, which is the app, the command line utility, which verifies that you have the desired gems and their version numbers. Remember, gems. There's a massive collection of gems. Let me just show you. Going on a different tack here for a second. Ruby gems. Okay. Pick your. Wait, is this the one I want? Yeah, here they are. But there's a better directory of them actually. It's called what do you think? Gem library. No. Let's look at Ruby Toolbox. That's another one that's really good. Yeah, this is a good one. So you pick a topic.
Oh, I was just trying to clear from
Let me just make this bigger. You pick a topic you care about, a category you care about, and active record plugins, 1 million of them. Background processing, 1 million of them. Communication, 1 million of them. CSS, data persistent, developer tools. And this is just a fraction of them. And for each one, you can see interesting facts like, okay, among the table builders gems, here's all of them that are good. There's a parameter on each one that says, here, how many times it's been downloaded, which is an indication of popularity, what the current version is, when it was released, which tells you how up to date it is. If it was released 3 years ago, you don't want to touch it. And this tells you how long, how long it survived. So this is a good way to tell which one you want to use. But if you have a need in your apps, look around. There's probably a gem that does it. Okay. Now don't forget. Oops, sorry. Don't forget to go CD. Oh, here. CD demo. What was it called? Demo 2. Yeah. So CD demo 2. Okay. Next, we're going to do is I'm going to edit. I'm going to edit the gem file and add a few gems that I think are useful and interesting. And the way you do that, the way I usually do that is I put it at the bottom, separate from the stuff that was automatically generated by Rails. So if I ever have to regenerate it, I can find the ones I added. Put them down here. Boop. Save the file. And I go back here and I have to do bundle to have it grab those two. Okay, that was quite fast. I guess I already had them installed, that's why. What?
I'm sorry, I think I missed it. Where did you?
What?
I think I missed it. Where
How far back do you want to go?
Where's is it under the vendor file that you found all your gems?
No, gem file. It's the top level file called gem file. Yes.
What did you do with the bundle?
I just typed, why did I do it or what did I do? I just
What
typed
did I
bundle.
do? Why did you do that?
Like that. Bundle.
Bundle. Oh.
No, that's the same as bundle install.
What does that do?
Okay, so what it does is it reads this file called the gem file, which you can find in the root of your Rails directory, called gem file. Gem file contains a list, is comments, gem, which say for this particular application, these are the gems that are required. Okay? And often, here's the version number. you know, about 2.0, or here, I don't care, whatever the latest one is. Okay.
I have a follow-up question.
Yeah, but I'm not done answering the first one. Okay? So that file is there, I save it, and remember I'm sitting in a particular Rails directory here, okay, not my system as a whole, but this app. Now I go to my shell, and I type the bundle command by itself, okay? And that went on. But that bundle command goes through that gem file, which is a declaration of gems, and says, do you have this one? Do you have this one? Do you have, oh, I forget that one. Okay, so it just brings the context up to speed. What was your follow-up?
You basically answered that because I was using Faker yesterday, and then when I ran the app, ran rake, it says Faker is not a gem.
Yeah, because you have to put Faker in your gem file.
Yeah.
Because rake says ignore everything that's on. Whenever you run Rails, it says ignore whatever happens to be on your computer. Make sure that the ones that were in the gem file are the only ones that you can see.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have to
added that line to gem file.
And then you
without running bundle, it's still.
Yeah, you got to run bundle then to have it processed.
It does process without running bundle.
Oh, it does? Okay, well, even better. Okay, yes.
Where did you put those gems in the gem file? Was it at the end?
I put them at the end, yeah. And that's just because it makes them easy to find. I don't mix them up with the system generated automatically. Okay, any other questions? I don't mind going off on tangents, so just ask me. Okay. Next I'm going to do is I'm going to run the 3 Rails generate commands. Now, interestingly, for the first time, you're seeing a different kind of generate, not generate scaffold, but generate resource and generate model. And I'm going to not get into it right now, just to point that out. But basically, all 3 are going to generate essentially the models that correspond to the records of the database I want. So the first one says Rails generate resource called person with these parameters, Rails generate resource event with these parameters, Rails generate model registration with these parameters. And okay, I'm going to just do it. I'm going to copy them from over here. And this is generating a whole bunch of files, as you can see here. Okay, it generated all kinds of files. It generated even some JavaScript. It generated some YML files, all kinds of stuff. Okay, so it does a lot of setting up for you. So now, if we take a look at our directory and look inside the app subdirectory, which is kind of the most important one in a way, and I look under models, I see now that I have 3 models, event.rb, person.rb, and registration.rb. Those were generated as a result of my doing the Rails generate just now. If I look in them, they have almost nothing in them. Okay? All right. But one fun thing that it created was a file called seeds.rb. Now, seeds are basically initial data in your database, call it that, okay? It's what I want to have there always. It may sometimes have like an administrator account, or it may have some built-in help, or whatever it is you just want to have in there. Okay, so the example I'm going to use is I'm going to say, to help me test, I'm going to create an event, a person, and a registration. And if you look at the syntax here, this is all just Ruby code. So these are class methods, and the class method create will create a record of that type with the required fields filled out. So this would create a single registration with person ID 3 and event ID 2. Okay? I don't know why I picked those numbers, but that's what it says. Similarly, let me just make this wider. I created a person called Angela Smith, born on this date, who's female. That doesn't make sense. Zip code such and such. And I created an event called the welcome event on this date which is time. So basically created 3 records, 1 in each database. Now this is just code. I haven't executed it yet. It's just code. I'm going to save it. Go back here. And now I'm going to do a few very interesting commands. And I express them here, what the commands are, but there's many other commands that are available. Remember again that when you do rake something or other, that means that rake is just a collection of programmer utilities, the handy little commands you use to do your work. And you will, at some point in the future, write your own rake tasks. But for the moment, you're just going to be using the rake tasks you get. A rake task is known simply by the first argument after the word rake. And in fact, if you do rake dash capital T, you will see a list of all the rake tasks. Actually, all the important ones. With like 1 sentence of documentation. So if you ever forget how to spell something, whatever, you can do rake T. Yes? Was that a question?
Yeah, I guess kind of. So DB create, rake DB create. So migrate sets up the tables and whatnot. So does DB create if you're using say Postgres, does that perhaps initialize the database server thing?
Well, actually, let's be precise. When you create a migration, you just create a text file. It doesn't do anything until you run it. And you run it with rake DB migrate.
Right.
Okay?
So create, migrate, when you run that sets up the actual tables in it, but the DB create, that creates your database server on your computer kind of?
No, it would tell the database server to create that database. So in the case of running with SQLite, where there really isn't a database server, it creates a database file. So let's actually look at that. Let's check into that. If we look inside the database directory, normally you would see development.SQLite3, the file name that contains the persistent records for the development environment. There's nothing there now. Why? Because I haven't done DB create yet. Now, it turns out that migrate does DB create as a side effect. So these are not all as I wrote here. Although it's not correct really, but it says creates the database for the current environment. So if I'm in development mode, it means telling SQLite create a database. If I'm in production mode on Heroku, where it's Postgres, it's going to tell Postgres create a database. It's not going to run Postgres. It's going to assume Postgres is there, but it's going to tell it, give it a command. Okay? All right. Let's just do each one and see what happens, because I don't remember exactly either which one does what. If I do database create, it says, it doesn't say anything, but if I look here, I now have these 3 files. I have development, that's SQLite3, empty, and I have test.SQLite3, empty. So this one small step of what DB migrate does. If I now do rake DB seed, that says, look at the seeds that are being, create the seed data for me, please, okay? So if I do rake DB seed, it says, I can't do that because your database schema is not up to date. You have 3 pending migrations. I wrote the migrations, but I did not run them, okay? So I'm going to do rake DB migrate. As you see, it says right there what I need to do, DB migrate. And there it gives me the feedback that it created 3 tables, people, events, and registrations. Okay? Now, I'll do seed again. And now it's created data in the development database. So if we now look here at development. There it is. It's full of data. It's got, that's, a lot of nulls, but somewhere in here is the fact that I created one event. The development.SQLite3 is the database which contains all 3 tables, right? The database is a collection of tables. Okay? Anybody stumped? Anybody lost? Anybody confused? Who's actually trying to follow along on their computers? Cool. And is it working? It's working? Mm-hmm. Good. Excellent. Great. Awesome. So now, we're good to go. So the next thing I want to do is I'm going to show you something that you don't use a lot, but it's helpful for illustration. There's another command on the Rails utility called db console versus Rails console. This is Rails db console. This lets me talk directly to the database without Ruby, without anything in the middle. And the syntax you're allowed to do here corresponds to the syntax of the database, which generally is SQL, structured query language. You don't have to learn this language per se, but it's interesting just for the purpose of what we're doing. So I'm going to run Rails console. And it's good to go, and it's because SQLite is my default database for development, that's where it's sitting. All right? And the first thing I can do is I'm going to ask SQLite, what databases do you know? How many databases do you think I will see? You think 3?
Tables.
How many databases do you think you'll see? 1? We have 1 and 3. Who wants to vote for 1? Who wants to vote for 3? 1 vote for 3, 3, 3. Okay. The ones win. Because there's one database that contains 3 tables. But if I say .tables, it's going to know about 4 tables. Interesting. I thought we only created 3. We created events, okay. We created people, okay. We created registrations, okay. What is this? Schema migration. Who can take a guess at what that might be? What might it contain? Yeah.
I think it might contain each time, every time you change the schema, it will map to the migration IP or something.
Yeah, essentially. It has a number in there. I don't know exactly how to start, but it has information in there that allows your Rails app to know how far along you've run all the migrations. When before it said you need to run these 3 migrations, it's because it looked in this table and said nothing has been run yet. So this is a very small table that simply keeps track of what migrations have been run. You'd never deal with it directly. So now I can say select star from people, which this is classic SQL. Those of you who have taken database courses have seen this. And this just says select all the records from the table called people, ending with a semicolon. And it says one record. It's a text form, ID 1, Angelo Smith, date, blah, 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 blah. Or I can say select star from people where ID is greater than 1, semicolon. Why does it not print anything out? Huh?
Yeah, because there's only Angela Smith and she's number 1. There's no one else.
Yeah, she is. Weird name. I gotta fix that. Yeah, exactly. That's a typo, but it's good to check if we're awake. There it is. Okay? And we can go on, but it's not important, so I'm going to get out of this and now go to the Rails console, which is a lot more fun. How do I do this? Quit? Exit? Control D? Boom. So now I'm going to go Rails console. Rails console runs IRB or pry, whatever it is you like. But first it sets up the complete Rails environment and opens the database and gets everything ready to go. So now I can talk directly to my model objects. And I can say person.all. Person is a model class written in Ruby, descendant from the active record base class. So it automatically gets all these methods. And one of them is person.all. And it returns, oh, I got to turn this thing off to not confuse you. I'll turn this off and then later on I'll turn it back on because it's very cool, but it's going to confuse you. So I'm going to turn it off first. File, open, resume. So by the way, hey, okay, didn't do that.
What folder is this again?
It's in my home directory, and you don't have it, but it is. I'll stop and pause here. It's called .pry.rc. Dot meaning in Unix land and Mac and in Linux obviously is an invisible file that you don't see if you just ask for a listing of the directory, and it generally contains configuration or other system information. Like in all if you're working with a Git repository, you'll find a .git directory. Very commonly, you'll have utility name rc, which is like initial commands before you run pry in this case. So whenever I ran pry, you might have noticed *** being printed. That's because of that put s there. That just reminds me that I'm running .pry.rc. And there's a set of commands here which I'll turn on in a minute, but for now I'll turn them off to have you see the difference that we're doing here. Rails console, okay. And now I'm going to go person.all again, and that's more what you're used to seeing. Okay, so basically, first of all, Rails will show me the SQL command that it sent to the DB console on my behalf. Select people from people, and it'll show me here what looks like an array in brackets containing one item, which is the one person, the one record that's there. And I say that it looks like an array because it actually is something else, another kind of collection, but don't worry about that. And then within that, each element is an object class person. Okay? So, for example, I can say person.where gender : F, and it finds one person, Angelo Smith. Okay, now think through what's going on here. Person is a Ruby class inherited from active record base. I'm giving it a class method called where to take some parameters, even though this looks like syntax, it's just method calls. That causes it to say, aha, I'm active record, I know that this corresponds to the person's database. I know that it's a SQL database. I will come up with the correct SQL command to give it. I'll send it through DB console to the database. The database sends a bunch of data back, the thing with the vertical bars. I'll translate it and turn it, I will instantiate an object of class person and fill it up. That's what happens. But it's just a Ruby class. Similarly, I could say A equals person dot where gender. Now I'll do it even different actually. Where name Angelo Smith. Oops. Now, I could try to say A dot gender is male, and I get this error. What did I do wrong, and why did I do that wrong? Read the error message and think about it. Yes?
There's no way to change genders as of yet. Only in creation can you set a gender. You can't actually change gender.
No, that's a good idea, but no, it's something else. Yes?
There's only one method as of now for the person class, and that is only initialized with certain parameters in it.
Now, it's actually in front of you. I want to make it bigger. Notice that when I said person where, it returned an array of persons. Why did it return an array even though I told it exactly who I wanted? Why didn't it just return me Angelo Smith?
Because there can be more than one person with that.
Exactly. When you do a where, it's going to return to you an array because it doesn't know how many people will match it. And obviously I did a.gender, it's a method that the array doesn't know how to do. So help me rewrite that command so that it will work. Yes?
A index 0 dot gender.
Exactly. A0 dot gender equals female. Okay? All right, now if I look at A again, it's going to say Angelo Smith is now, oh, I should have said male. Anyway. I should have said male. That doesn't prove much. Let me just, let's actually prove something. Angela Smith is now male. Boop. Okay, it's still sitting in that array. Now, if I go select star, oh, sorry, no, that's, if I say person, people, no, person, dot all, and I see here, Angela Smith, still female. Take a guess why that is. Somebody who hasn't spoken yet.
You need to save this.
Yeah, and so what's going on here? You're right, I didn't do a save. So say more though, what's going on? Okay, somebody else? It's the right answer, but say more, yes.
The object you modified was just a local object, and that's not the actual database.
Yeah, exactly. This is where the abstraction is a little leaky. I have to know that. So I have to then say a dot a sub 0. Everybody? Yeah, okay. Dot save. And notice here's some SQL talk. Begin transaction, update, commit transaction. Now, if I say people.all, person.all, I see that Angela Smith is male.
Finally, was that easy?
Pardon?
Finally.
Yeah, finally. Okay. Yes?
I know if you use the create method when you're creating the entry, it saves it directly to the database in the table. Is there a way to do that with editing, like in this case where you
No, I think when you make that kind of change, you have to always save it. But you're right. That's a very important point. Most of the time, it's a two-step process. You make the change, you save it. But some of the time, it's not. So you have to go back and look at your documentation. Create, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's going, why did you do that? I want that too. Okay, so here it is, active record. And you go back and you find, let me get rid of this space. Not put it back in. Create. Okay? Here's the documentation for active record. Create, returns a new object, the collection type. Oh, a minute. No, that's not the right one. Anyway, if you find the right one, create is such a common word, there's a million of them, and read the documentation. And it'll come up in the reading of the book that I'm going to point you guys at. It's going to come up. Okay? All right, continuing. I'm just going to do a few more of the operations here. Person dot where DOB greater than question mark, comma, date dot new 1995. Nobody. So nobody in my database, according to this, was born after 1995. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes. No, it isn't. DOB. Oh yeah, he was born before. No, he was born in 1991. Yes, correct. But if we go, instead of 1995, we go 2012.
It'll be the same.
Say what?
It'll be the same.
Because he's not 1990.
Yeah, that's right.
There he is. And if I say dot count, there's one person. Yes?
Can you explain why you have DOB greater than question mark?
Yes, I can, absolutely. So first of all, there's about, everybody take a look at, or not right now, but it's probably mentioned down here, very important reference. Well, do a Google for Rails guides active record, and you'll find a very succinct summary of everything. Don't have to do it now. But there's multiple ways of doing queries, depending on how simple the case is, and also some of them are older and some of them are more succinct. In this case, we're doing it because we want to allow a computation to compute the DOB value. So the question mark, first question mark corresponds to the first parameter, second question mark would be the second parameter, and so on. A little bit, I'll leave it at that. So, depending on if it was a fixed number, I mean, it would have been much easier because if I was looking for something constant like name is, I can do user.where name : Peter Salas. But because it's a greater than, you have to go to a slightly more complicated syntax. Okay? All right. So, I did this already. Now we're going to get into some fun. My kind of, for me anyway. You can make your own judgments. So I'm going to go to the model for person. For the first time, I'm going to add some code to it. I'm going to tell it that one person, it's right here, can have many registrations. Furthermore, one person can have many events, but you got to look through the table called registrations. This is a declarative language. It is actually simply Ruby code. But the way you read it is sort of almost like you recite it. The person has many registrations. That registrations has to be another model. Or a person also has many events through registrations, using registrations as the bridge. Okay? And we'll do the other ones too.
So this is like how it sets up community tables, or?
No, okay, so this is very easy to confuse because let me just copy this and I can't talk and type at the same time. There are multiple steps involved in getting the connection to happen. One step is writing the migration in the right way that creates the extra table called registrations and the extra columns for the two IDs. That's a model, so it'll have its own model file, registrations.rb. The second step is to do regdb migrate, which will actually create the underlying database. And this third step has to do with when you go access the records through Ruby, how does it know that if I'm looking for all the registrations a person has, how to accomplish that, how to do the join. And that's what this is. So it is, if you decide that record A and record B have this kind of relationship to each other, there are a couple of different places you have to indicate that. Okay? So now, interestingly now, I'm going to be able to go, okay, I have to exit this and restart it. You rarely have to do that, but you do have to do it when you make changes to the model. And I'm going to say person.find 1. And it's going to say person ID is 1. And that's it. But if I now say person.find 1 dot first, this is interesting, okay. Let me just do it this way to make it a little easier to read. Maybe it may or may not be easier to read. Dot first is the same as take index 0 out of an array. Give me the first element. Okay, it makes it a little bit easier to read. And then registration. Yes. Oh, right. No, I don't need the first in this case because it's returning a single thing. What method is missing, I wonder? Registration. Okay, let me just go the way I wrote it in my own notes. Not copy it, in fact. Okay, let's study this. So the command was person where name is Angelo Smith, which returns a collection of people who have that name. We know there's only one, but it's a collection. Take the first element of that collection and give me all his registrations. Okay? So remember, Angelo Smith is going to this concert and that concert and that concert. So what does it do? It says first select people from that table where people's name is Angelo Smith, and then it says select registrations where registrations person ID is the person ID I just got. So here's where it's doing the join. Okay, so it did one search, did the other search, and that's what it's returning. And it in fact said nobody. Why did it say? I thought it was going to say nobody. Well, let's look more closely and see why that is. if we look at our registrations table, singular, we see that there's one registration only, and that's between person ID 3 who's going to event ID 2. But as somebody pointed out before, Angelo's person ID is 1. So this ain't going to work because there's no person number 3, right? So let's create 2 more people just for fun. Yeah. People dot person dot create name Peter and person dot create name colon Jacob. Oops, colon. So now my person database has 3 records in it, and the third one, ID 3, Jacob. Okay? So now if I go back and do this command, except instead of saying, hey, okay, I'll just type it in. It's easier. What's wrong with my, okay, it's not, just type it in, forget it. Person dot where name colon Jacob, comma, sorry, dot first, dot registration,
I think it's registrations.
Yeah, right, because it could have more than one registration. So what did it do? It selected people, where people named it Jacob, forget about the order by, then it went to registrations and said with person ID is the person ID I just found. And boom, it finds that Jacob is registered for only one event, and that's event number 2. But there's no event number 2, so let's quickly put that in. Okay, so now here's what something that took me a long time to notice. So I'm going to try to point it out to you so you will see through the magic a little bit. Notice this word registrations, right? That's a method called on an individual object of class person. It's called registrations. Notice this word here, registrations. This line is creating that method. This line is saying, creating a method called registrations on the object of class person that does this particular join. So if you sometimes think you create, because it's very common, like I just did, to forget whether you put a plural or singular there or have a typo there, and you'll type person1 dot registrations and it says no such method, and you go like, I don't understand, I have it. Well, it may be that you have this thing behind the colon here is going to be the name of the method. Okay? So, going back here. Now the next thing that's interesting is, what if I said not registrations, but events? Ah, look at that. Now it went 2 levels automatically. I asked for person named Jacob. First, the first person with the name Jacob, what are all his events? And it said, look for name Jacob, select inner join, you database guys. You learned about inner join. You probably never quite understood it. Here, Rails is doing it for you. It's figured out that an inner join is what you need here. And not only that, but with the particular database we're using, which is SQLite, this is the most efficient way to do it. That's what they tell me anyway. And it did the inner join. So we're touching 3 tables. We're touching people, we're touching registrations, and we're touching events. And out of the other end comes an array of all the events that Jacob has participated in or has registered for. Okay? All right. I am not going to go to the validations. because I want to leave some, because it's 1:42 already. I want to leave some time for anybody who's a little confused about what we've done so far and wants to ask a question. Yes?
My only question is about the syntax of has many and belongs to.
Yep.
So, for example, like if I have two tables and I want a many-to-many relationship between them.
Yep.
So there's a tertiary table in
Yep.
between.
Yep.
Say that's like students, departments, and enrollments of the tertiary table.
Yep.
Would I say that students has many departments and departments has many students, or would I say like students has many enrollments and departments has many enrollments?
Let's look at it.
Okay.
Here, this is exactly analogous. Okay, so but what you would say is, first of all, this is a student, this is an enrollment.
Sure.
A student has many enrollments. Stop. An enrollment belongs to one course, right? Because if you have an enrollment, it's just one, individual enrollment is for one course, so you'd have enrollment belongs to course, and enrollment belongs to student. And then finally for the actual course, you'd say it has many enrollments.
Okay.
Now, this and this is where you short circuit the hop by doing, in addition, a student has many courses, which is the skip, it's this
Right.
one, but just use enrollments as an intermediary.
Okay.
So this one is the cool one that does the skip in one step. So you don't actually have to ever look at enrollment separately. Okay, this is tricky to understand. So once you get the hang of it, you will have understood a lot of it. And this is where, in the old days, we used to use has and belongs to many, but this is now considered to be the much better practice.
So does this always appear in pairs?
Yeah, well, yes and no. Because if you think about, let's start by saying yes, it's a safe bet. But why would it not be there? Well, if you know from your logic that you're never going to type event dot registrations, that doesn't mean anything to you. You're always going to go to people. Then you don't even have to put this in here because this is just there to create that magic method called dot registrations. But that's a little bit more sophisticated or more tricky. The simplest thing is to just decide to connect, to put them all in there. Okay? Any other questions? Any other lingering questions? Yes?
How do we debug stuff here? Because there's a lot of different files.
Yeah.
In a very,
You do it step by step. So you can use, first of all, you can do Rails console, which is a very good way to experiment.
So I followed you and I did, for example, person where name is Jacob first event or whatever,
Mhm.
and for example, I got active record has many through association not found error.
Okay.
So how do I fix such things, or what kind of errors are we expecting?
Well, first of all, you could Google that directly, and you'll probably get an answer. But what it's say it again. Read the error again.
Has many through association not found error.
Okay. So I would look at the has many through. These things are called associations. First of all, and so I would look at typos here. Okay, and I would I would make sure that my migrations were correct. Now, this is also where unit testing comes in. So you could write a unit test that creates one user, a test fixture, one event, another test fixture, one registration, another test fixture, and try to combine them and see that they're there. And maybe I'll do that next time. I'll show you how to do that. But you could do unit testing to verify your associations are working. Any other questions? Lingering questions? Okay, good, excellent. This is all being recorded, so you can go try to reconstruct the crime if you're so inclined. Say what? I heard something. No? Okay. So next week, 2 weeks from now, next Monday, next Tuesday, we're going to talk about controllers. And so you have 2 chapters to read. This one has no coding. This does have coding. And we're going to review this in more detail. We're going to talk a lot more about the URL, about why I said generate resource, not generate model, and so on and so forth. These are all the building blocks. You know, we're building the foundation here, we're getting up there now. So take your time, experiment to try to get this. Although it takes time, because remember you're dealing with a 747 here, it's complicated. Don't expect it to be trivial. Don't be upset, you gotta just get it, understand it. Okay? That's all I got. See you, have a good break, everybody, including me. I have to get out of here on Monday.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Yeah, so anyway, that's the hope. That is the hope.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I can't remember if somebody asked this before, but
It's all right.
you know how when you type in like person.where